Basketball fans out there, thank you for coming back, man, and joining us for what I like to consider to be a really awesome podcast here on today. I know it's bright and early, but wipe the sleep out of your eyes, get up bright and early, brush your teeth, all that good stuff, because we got a really, really good show for you guys on today. You are watching Tate's Take, the podcast with me, Deshaun Tate, of course, streaming live on YouTube as well as on Facebook. Remember to share this information with a friend, family member, colleague, enemy, mama, grandmama, a little bit of everybody. And you know that you can go and subscribe. That's the word of the day. Subscribe, subscribe, subscribe. I cannot stress it enough to make sure that you guys do that. I like to call it the best, the most informational, the most educational podcast or basketball content in the form of a podcast on the planet, and find it anywhere that you find your favorite podcast, that being iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Red Circle, Stitcher, the whole nine. And really looking forward to a really awesome guest that we're going to have that's going to be stopping by a little bit later after we get started and through a little bit of some of these free agency acquisitions and things like that. Lloyd, the head coach of the Atlanta Hawks, is going to be joining us and going to pick his brain a little bit on some of the stuff that, you know, he may feel like the needs in the areas that needs to be addressed the most, I guess, in free agency and the pickup of Danilo Gallinari as of yesterday, and even more so the draft picks that they picked up for the Atlanta Hawks. So we're going to get into a lot of that stuff. And until he joins us, I want to kind of update everybody with what is going on in the world of the NBA right now in terms of free agency, and maybe get some of you guys' opinions and things like that of what you've seen so far, who your favorite team is, what do you want to see your favorite team do, how big of a splash that you would like to see them make in free agency as a whole. And I want to start off right now, obviously, with Montrezl Harrell, and this is just a little bit of an update, and I'm going to give a little bit of detailed information on my opinion on it, starting with Montrezl Harrell, who just signed a 2-year, $19 million deal from the Los Angeles Clippers, now a Los Angeles Lakers. So he obviously doesn't have very far to go, but nonetheless, a workhorse, with that big massive body. Kind of remind me with that body type of like a Bam Adebayo, got that big that nice motor like a Kenneth Faried used to have when he was playing in the NBA, reigning six man of the year award. And so maybe joining LeBron James. I'm not sure if anybody will have as stout of a front court kind of like or just on the guys that are on the roster. Between Montrezl Harrell and LeBron James and some of those other guys. Malik Beasley, which I'm just a tiny bit surprised by, landing that 4-year, $60 million deal, re-signing with the Minnesota Timberwolves. That part was just a tiny bit unexpected, and really not sure the direction that they plan to go with him, considering the fact that they have Anthony Edwards. And you know what? I want to make sure that we give some credit. I was listening to a couple buddies of mine that had a podcast, and they were really kind of talking about the job that Leonard Hamilton has done with his recruiting at Florida State. And when you start talking about guys like Jonathan Isaac and Dwayne Bacon and obviously, Malik Beasley this upcoming year, Scotty Barnes is going to be a freshman, expected to be a lottery pick, maybe in the top 5. And we just seen Devin Vassell and Patrick Williams be taken in the top 11 slots of the NBA draft. I mean, you got to give credit to a guy like Leonard Hamilton, not just for the coach that he is, and obviously being somewhat of a player's coach. You always get those long and athletic players that come in there in Tallahassee, but yet still, even then, just really being the coach that have kind of exceeded the expectations, done everything but get to a Final Four. Malik Beasley obviously fitting the bill with along with some of those players that I just previously mentioned. Trey Burke gets a 3-year, $10 million deal, re-signing with the Dallas Mavericks, and I think that he had a great season to be Trey Burke. in Dallas, considering how much he's kind of bounced around the league a little bit. But he still came on really strong with Dallas and gave them a solid point guard option and contribution, especially in the bubble, and trying to help as much as possible take some pressure off of Luka Doncic. So I think that was definitely really big and really huge for them to be able to keep him around for, somewhere around 3.3 million a year, if you will. Dwight Howard, wow, that's been a hot name in free agency so far. Dwight Howard getting the veteran minimum, 1 year, just coming off of a world championship with the Los Angeles Lakers. And let me say this first, because I don't want to get too much into Dwight Howard and some of the tweets that he put out and things like that before he was acquired. But what I do want to say enough to say is that nobody was happier for a player on that Los Angeles Lakers roster that received a world championship than I was with Dwight Howard, a stand-up guy. Just a real class act, never shied away or turned away people when it came to autographs. I had the opportunity to kind of get to know him a little bit, which I'm not going to say I was the biggest fan of Dwight Howard, to be honest, at one point in time, but I really got to learn him, in that space. And pick his brain a little bit. And some of the things that I learned were really things that, it tells you or teaches you not to judge a book by its cover. And so having those opportunities and the way that he embraced me as a reporter, that gave it a little bit more emphasis on how happy I was about him winning a world championship. So now he goes from the Los Angeles Lakers to the Philadelphia 76ers. They're trying to add some pieces, and that's not a bad piece to have considering his energy at his age. Coming off the bench, I would imagine, behind Joel Embiid. So Christian Wood receiving 41 million, 3-year contract with the Houston Rockets. Now, that was one of the bigger names in free agency that I know that a lot of people were really looking forward to seeing what his future was going to look like and where his future was going to be, whether that be remaining in the Motor City or if that be with a new home. And now he's with a new home, but I tell you what, he is arguably, or in some cases, inarguably, one of the most improved players in the NBA, that's for sure. Joe Harris, who I know I heard his name kind of floating around in a couple different places, specifically here in Atlanta, getting a 4-year, $75 million deal, re-signing with the Brooklyn Nets, who are looking to be a dominant force in the East, especially if they get James Harden. Don't ask me how in the world that's going to work. But just to be able to see Joe Harris not only pick up that deal, but seeing that he's going to be playing alongside Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant, I can only imagine where this thing is going. They won't have any issues getting putting the ball in the basket this year, that's for sure. And it's going to be interesting to see how a lot of that is going to work out. We'll see how that James Harden deal works out because Houston, we got a problem. I don't know. Just seeing how what's going to happen with Russell Westbrook and the urgency that the front office has now that Daryl Morey is no longer in H-Town, what the importance is in terms of keeping some of those guys between Harden and Westbrook on the same team. So as it seems, I guess we have Harden, who played with Westbrook and Durant in OKC, then now playing with one of them in Russell Westbrook in Houston, maybe now moving on with the other counterpart to be Kevin Durant. So good for Joe Harris to be able to sign that deal for him. Who else do we have? Oh, Danilo Gallinari. We're going to get into that here in just a second when we bring on head coach Lloyd Pierce, who should be joining us here within the next few minutes. Josh Jackson, now a Piston. Jahlil Okafor, now a Piston. One guy coming from Memphis, the other one, I believe, New Orleans. And the Pistons has been extremely, extremely active, not only in the draft, but also in free agency, picking up some guys. I like to think that they were in position to get some really quality players. Isaiah Stewart, out of the University of Washington, and came out of high school as one of the top players ranked in the country. Then you got Sadiq Bey out of Villanova, who I think really is a Swiss Army knife, is really balanced on both sides of the ball. And then, of course, there's Killian Hayes with that nice 6'5" frame guard. I know a lot of people compare him to a Tony Parker, and I think that there are definitely some comparisons that you can make between those players. And Josh Jackson, I'm not saying this is going to be his last stop. I'm not sure if he can afford it not to be, but for a guy who got drafted by the Phoenix Suns really early, I think number 4 in the draft or somewhere right around that range a few years ago, and bounced around a little bit between the G League and the Memphis Grizzlies, now finding a new home with his old home where he comes from in the Motor City in Detroit. So those are just a couple of guys. Oh, De'Aaron Fox. How could I possibly even go about forgetting that? De'Aaron Fox, guard for the Sacramento Kings, 5-year, $163 million. That within itself that's a hefty amount. Not necessarily is in a position where I think that he is as healthy as consistently as I would like to see him sometimes, but nonetheless, getting that nice amount of money for himself to be able to come back and sign a big time contract. And of course, right there in his clause is $196 million supermax potentially. So he resigns with the Kings, and I'm excited to see what his future looks like. I know there's been a lot of comparisons, especially from a speed standpoint, to a player like John Wall, which I'm happy to see what that future looks like. I really am. A little undersized in terms of a little thin, but nonetheless, he is a player that I believe can really make some noise at the next level, and the expectations of him doing so are very high. And that's going to be a really tough team in terms of Sacramento Kings to be able to challenge in the West, hopefully keeping their fingers crossed, of course, because they've got, we know they've got Marvin Bagley, and I'm not really sure what's going to happen with Bogdanovic, just from the simple fact that he was a part of that big trade that also Milwaukee received from Sacramento. And then there's some things going on with him not being in Milwaukee. I don't think it's a matter of him not wanting to go, while there's still some underlying issues there, and it's keeping it from being all but a done deal at this point. So we'll find out exactly where he lands. But then you got Buddy Hield there in the backcourt as well. The pieces that you picked up between Tyrese Halliburton, Jamias Ramsey, who I really, really believe, and those were just 2 guys alone that not only I thought went a little further down in the draft, but to my liking, but yet still were players that I thought really could be steals in the draft. And of course, we're going to get into some of that draft stuff too here in a second. Jordan Clarkson, who I believe was a very key contributing piece to Utah Jazz in going up 3-1 on Denver early in the playoffs. He ends up re-signing with Utah, 4-year, $52 million contract. So good for him. Again, we talked about the Detroit Pistons being really, really high on some of their players that they were acquiring as well. Mason Plumlee obviously got in on some of that as well, now being named a Detroit Piston. And without further ado, I want to make sure that I can bring my guy in here because it's been a little while, but I'm really, really happy to have him back in the green room with us now. And as I get ready to bring him in, the head coach for the Atlanta Hawks. And I think it's only right if I do this first, Coach, if I can kind of put my draft hat on and get myself acclimated and get myself together. Head coach for the Atlanta Hawks. Check him out on Twitter at Lloyd Pierce LP. Coach, how are you this morning?
Deshaun, what's happening? How are you?
Man, I'm outstanding. Thank you so much for asking. I want to start off with this first, and thank you for joining me. There was something organized with you and being a pillar and a staple here in this city of Atlanta, and I'm really happy to be able to see this. Organizing the Coaches for Justice movement. How exactly did that come about? And are there any particular people that you kind of saw from afar growing up that made you kind of feel like, you know what, because of them, this kind of put some interest for me?
First, I think the reason why it came about was just kind of everything that we're seeing going on in our society and our country during a really adverse time with the pandemic. I think just the frustrations have mounted, and the areas of concern have been exaggerated even more in terms of racism and inequality. And so I just thought, as coaches, it was a great opportunity for us to really find our voice. We had NBA teams in 30 different cities, and we're responsible for the growth and development, maturity on and off the court of 450 players in our league, of which 70 to 80% are African American. So it's really an opportunity for us as coaches to band together and find our voices and figure out what we can do to address some of the areas of concern. Because with our platforms, especially together with the players, with the owners, with the league, with our platform, we have an opportunity to really impact communities, really change the narrative of what we think is just and what is right. And that's really the purpose behind it. Who can we work with in our 30 cities, local organizations, grassroots organizations that are addressing some of these concerns, and how can we amplify their messaging?
You know what? And I want to say, and I'm sure you've heard this a lot, but I want to give you a personal thank you for stepping in and stepping into that place, because that means a lot to me. And some of the stances that you have taken since you've been the head coach here in Atlanta has had a significant amount of effect of my life, and things that I've actually decided to do when it comes to being a part of different things in this community. So I definitely do commend you on that. For another guy that's right beside you now on the coaching staff, Nate McMillan, you add him to your coaching staff. How exactly did that come about in terms of the things that you really believe that you saw in him that could really help you in making this decision and helping coach this team?
Well, that's an easy decision for me. The guy has 15, 16 years of head coaching experience with 3 different teams. He's a former player for 12 years. So when Indiana decided to let him go, he and I had been in communication. I gave him about a month. He said he needed some time to figure out what his next move was going to be. And after about a month or so, I reached back out to see if he had any interest in getting on board. At first he didn't. He was really contemplating sitting out the season. And my wife and I and my daughter were able to get out to Carolina and have a little mini getaway. And we met up with he and his wife and had dinner. And then they were able to come down to Atlanta and do the same thing, have a mini getaway, and we were able to have dinner and really kind of discuss, my vision, my thoughts, and his role of how he could contribute to what we're doing, and also just kind of regain his edge and his competitive edge and his fire for coaching in a different role. And so I'm glad it worked out. That opportunity was presented when G. Foss was given an opportunity to be the lead assistant out in Indiana with the Pacers, and so happy for G. Foss as well. But really excited to have someone with that type of experience on the staff, and gives me a different voice, a different set of eyes, and it also shows the seriousness in which we're headed with our team. To add that wealth of experience, we're trying to do the same thing in free agency, and we'll know in a couple more days when things start to finalize who we end up with. And but I think our guys get the message loud and clear.
From one leadership role in Lloyd Pierce to another one in Nate McMillan. Now there's Vince Carter, who won't be joining this team. for next year, or for the upcoming season rather, of veteran leadership, kind of taking on that role. What have you saw, or who have you saw under the impression of that kind of, and not expecting that they're going to be Vince Carter, but just a couple guys that you've seen kind of take that steps that you say, you know what, I can see him in the same mode of being someone that the other guys can kind of account for on this roster, that can kind of look up to him in those same ways?
Well, I don't think it's really, I mean, you can't replace Vince Carter and think someone's going to fill that role in terms of his experience and credibility and leadership. All of our guys are still under 5 years of experience in the league. So, it's apples and oranges in that sense of comparison. It's really up to our guys to have developed leadership, and that's ongoing, whether it's leading by example or really just kind of vocal communication with one another. So I think that's really kind of the big area of concern, is how long will it take them and what can they do in the interim? The best thing our players can do right now is lead by example and find their voice amongst each other.
This is a team that added, as of last night, Danilo Gallinari. What going for? Not only what does he bring to the table for you guys, and what you felt like you needed to?
We haven't signed anyone yet.
Oh, okay. So we'll leave that one there. Is there a particular, and I'm not saying a particular player, but in terms of adjusting your needs in free agency, what areas on the floor or position wise do you really feel like this team, in order to get to the next level, that you need to kind of put in place?
Yeah, we've got 5 or 6 spots, I think, to fill in free agency, and so it's kind of everything. You like to add some depth and some production at that depth. You like to add some experience. We think we have a really tremendous young core of players that are going to play significant minutes, but can we add to that with veteran experience as well? Can we add to that leadership and character? Can we add to that competition, a very competitive group? And so that's really the focus, but we'll be able to do it at a variety of spots, having 5 or 6. I think it's 5 positions still to fill in free agency.
Is there any kind of, maybe not necessarily pressure that you're putting on the guys, but kind of putting emphasis on playoffs a little bit for the upcoming season? I mean, I know that's everybody's goal. Obviously, only you have to go to the playoffs in order to win it.
If that's pressure, I don't know why we're doing it.
Okay.
That kind of comes with the territory of sport. The objective is to win. And so that doesn't change regardless. If it all of a sudden feels like pressure, then we got different issues to worry about.
Now, the expectations that you have for some of your second-year players, I want to get into that a little bit. Obviously, Bruno Fernando, but more so from Cam Reddish and DeAndre Hunter. What kind of conversations have you had with them, or what is just your general expectations for guys who are going off of a rookie? Is it kind of like we're taking the training wheels off now of you guys? What is your expectations for those 2 guys coming in this year?
Yeah, I mean, with our guys, there's never been any training wheels on. I think for the most part, it's the opposite. You come in as a rookie and you play 28 minutes, you play 30 minutes a game. Those are higher expectations than normal, and so it's really produce at a more efficient and a higher level, and that's really it. What that looks like, I'm not too concerned, but it's produce at a higher and more efficient level.
My last question for you, Coach, and I don't want to keep you too long. I thank you for joining us. When it comes to the rookies, Skylar Mays, who was picked number 50 in the second round, and then Onyeka Onkongwu, I'm not sure how much you can really speak upon that, but what are some of the things that you saw between those 2 guys that made them a really good fit for this team?
Yeah, high character, extremely talented at their positions, extremely knowledgeable at their positions. We think they'll be good NBA players down the line, and really excited to have them here.
Thank you so much, Coach. I really appreciate it. Thank you for joining me today, man. We finally got this thing done, man, so I really appreciate it.
You got it. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Head coach of the Atlanta Hawks and Lloyd Pierce joining us. Remember to give him a follow at Lloyd Pierce LP, at Lloyd Pierce LP, and just kind of picking his brain a little bit, and kind of getting into some of the things that this team needs and some of his expectations for the next crop of guys. And we all know, we've all heard the rumors about, some of the guys that are maybe expected to be a part of this team down the road. And I'm kind of curious from some of you guys to let me know what are some of the things that you want to see. I do appreciate Keith Curtis for coming in and jumping in. Good buddy of mine, even though he's a Wolverine, said, do you think Detroit keeps all those bigs? I'm going to get to that here in a second. I appreciate Keith Curtis for checking in with us on Facebook. But in terms of the Atlanta Hawks and some of the things that they needed to address, obviously defense, and I think they did that with Onyeka Onkongwu, a guy who I really believe is very active all across the board. It's not about just scoring for him. It's not about just defense for him, but he is a balanced big. And I really wasn't sure how that was going to work out with the other bigs that are on the roster, like John Collins, who's obviously in position for a big payday coming up really soon. Also, Bruno Fernando, who's only in his second year, and although the expectations may not be that high, he's a second-year player on the young team, and there's things that he has got to do and got to get done. Then you have, Clint Capella, who we haven't seen in a Hawks uniform outside of standing, in the mirror wearing it. We haven't seen him on the floor to see what that looks like. But between Capella and John Collins, and when one of them isn't on the floor, Onyeka Onkongwu, who's going to, I believe, push some of the more veteran players or the older players on this team, because he is a dominant workhorse. He will put forth the effort and affect the game in different ways. And just Trae Young getting to, whenever he's not out there from suburban Atlanta shooting 3-pointers, just being able to penetrate to the basket and throwing some of those lobs. He's got wings that can catch those and put the ball in the basket as well. He's got the shooters. You've got your Cam Reddish, who is, I'm not going to say a defensive specialist per se, but certainly is one of the guys that brings the contribution from a defensive standpoint. And now that you get around that learning curve from the beginning of the season all the way up through mid-season, after that all-star break, he starts really showing flashes of the player that he could be, shooting the basketball strong as well, going to the basket, and just looking like his game is a little bit more confident overall. DeAndre Hunter, who I like to think was just pretty solid throughout the entire season. Maybe didn't blow you away. Maybe didn't things on the stat sheet didn't necessarily wasn't eye-popping out at you, but definitely contributed in his own way. Games when he had 20 points or 15, 17, 18 points, and it was kind of unexpected, and it seemed really quiet because that is kind of his demeanor. But nonetheless, for a rookie, there was things that you really saw him do very, very well. And then, of course, you have Kevin Huerter, who is arguably or inarguably the best pure jump shooter on this team from what we saw over the course of 3 years, whose name is not Trae Young. So I think it's going to be more and more interesting from a defensive standpoint. I want to really see exactly how things transpire. I've seen so many names being linked to the Atlanta Hawks over the course of the last few weeks. I've heard the Gordon Haywards, I've heard the Marcus Smarts, I've heard the Rajon Rondos. I've heard so much, and I'm really excited to see what the future will look like for this team, who I really do believe, and Lloyd Pierce kind of agreeing with me in a roundabout way, that playoffs is the thing. Like, that's something that we have to do. That's something that we really feel like we have to put into place for the city of Atlanta. And I definitely agree with that. My dude Emerson coming in and checking in with us, man, said, how do you think that the Hawks will do this year? I think that the Hawks will be a playoff team. I'm not really ready to whip out my Sharpie marker per se and automatically insert them into the playoffs with a 7 spot, 6 spot, 8 spot, anything like that. But I think as long as they don't have situations as to where, John Collins situation happened, or keeping from injuries, that type of thing, if they're able to stay healthy. But they are adding the depth just in case they get caught in situations like those. And I think that certainly helps a whole lot. So that's just kind of where I see them. But I think that they're right there on the cusp. I don't think it's a done deal, but I think that they are right there on the cusp, and they will be playing inside out and being able to accomplish that goal of making the playoffs, especially in the Eastern Conference this year. I really feel like it's something that they have to do. And another question that Emerson had, and appreciate him for coming in and contributing to the show. You see him down there on the Facebook, where we also stream live. What seed do you think the Hawks will get? Realistically, you know what? I'm going to say a 7 seed from where they stand right now. I think that, you know what? Let me take that back. I'm going to go 8 seed. And here's why. I give the Hawks this year an 8 seed because of the fact that I really need to see what they will, the pieces that they have right now. Of course, Danilo Gallinari is not signed yet. But considering the fact that he's all but an Atlanta Hawk already, I do want to say that it really kind of depends on what this team looks like from, after free agency. They have exactly what? 30, what's today? Yeah, about 31 days, somewhere right up in that range before the season starts. And it's a super quick turnaround in order to make something like that happen before the season starts. And so they've got to get on the ball. It's got to be quick. And I think that they'll have some defense a little bit more. They'll need to kind of build on that, but they were one of the worst 3-point shooting teams in the NBA last year. And I know that might be kind of hard to believe when you see some of the things that Trae Young was able to do. But nonetheless, the percentages was down. And so I really believe that adding a guy like Danilo Gallinari is helping that. And that just kind of goes back to one of Emerson's questions about how I think that he'll do with the Hawks. I definitely think that he will do well with the Hawks just because of the system that they're building it around. And I don't think he's a poor defensive player. I just don't think he's a great defensive player. And that's okay, because when you start looking around the landscape of the NBA right now, who can you really name outside of maybe 5 guys? I'm not even sure you can name 10 guys just right off the back as to who the most elite perimeter defenders are in the NBA. Yes, you're going to have your Marcus Smarts and you're going to have your Patrick Beverleys. And, you can name a few of those guys, I guess maybe Avery Bradley. I mean, there's a few of them. You want to give those guys some credit. But after you get past a certain point where you name probably about 6, 7, 8 guys, it's really going to be kind of tough to name your 8, 9s, and 10s. And it starts getting a little bit sketchy. And that just goes to show that this is not 90s basketball anymore. It's really, I'm kind of under the impression that it has a little bit more feel of, Pac-12 or Big 12 football to it, where it's really about outscoring opponents. Obviously that's what wins games, but what wins the championships is the defense. I like to think if you've been around basketball long enough, then you will know that you've heard that probably more than enough times. Our last one here on the night, new 7-10 playoff format gives everyone a chance at this point, and that is correct, coming from Keith, where the 9 in the 10 spot actually has an opportunity to be considered playoff. Now, I don't know if 9 and 10 is considered a wild card, kind of like how they do in football, but they won't call it that, obviously, but being considered a playoff team and being able to see their way in or play into that spot, similar to how we saw it last year in the bubble, where you had Memphis Grizzlies and I think who else was in that spot? I think the New Orleans Pelicans was right in that range as well. The Portland Trail Blazers was, obviously in that conversation, playing their way in. So I think that that's something that kind of helped them. And so I appreciate, even if this is just a little podcast, little segment, you never know who you're going to get here on the podcast with us, man. So that's why I always tell people, whether it's bright and early or super late at night, make sure that you find a way to be a part of this podcast, because you never know who we're going to bring on as a guest. I like to call it the best, the most informational, educational, and entertaining basketball content on the planet in the form of a podcast. So if you haven't done so yet, make sure that you go and subscribe. I can't say it enough. To the Tate's Take Podcast. You can find it anywhere and everywhere that you find your favorite podcast: iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Red Circle, Stitcher. We stream live on YouTube. We stream live on Facebook as well. We got people that even love the podcast, and I love your podcast, bro. So you know what? I'm just really happy that people enjoy the podcast. And you're very welcome, Emerson, man. You can be like Emerson too and be a part of this podcast and get shown some love on the pod. And we're always grateful and overly thankful and appreciative of that. My dude Keith Curtis coming on, saying the thing is fire. Keep going, keep sharing it with the people, man. Tell your mama, tell your grandmama, tell your friends, tell your family, tell your colleagues, tell your enemies. For crying out loud. Tell everybody about Tate's Take, the podcast. It's your favorite podcast, basketball podcast. I tell people all the time, if it's 94 feet long, 50 feet wide, 22 feet and 1 1/4 inches out on the perimeter for college, or 23 feet 1 3/4 inches out on the perimeter for the NBA, then we're going to talk that basketball right here, man, if that rim is 10 feet tall. So I appreciate everybody for checking in with us on today, man, and be sure to share this out with your friends. We got some really good content. Thank you so much to head coach Lloyd Pierce from the Atlanta Hawks, who did not have to do this, but definitely made time during a really, really busy season of the NBA free agency tipping off to kind of join us, come in, give us a chance to ask some questions, pick his brain a little bit about Nate McMillan, some of the things between the Coaching for Justice movements, and just a little bit of everything, what we can expect out of, the team this year, what we can expect out of second-year players, what he saw in the rookies and things like that. So I'm really happy for him to be able to do that, and make sure you go and subscribe. And lastly, make sure you give a follow on social media. That's Instagram, same as Twitter, at Tate's Take Hoops, TATES TAKEHOOPS, hashtag where basketball lives. We're going to be coming back talking about some Pistons. I told you I would do that, Keith Curtis, man. I got my dude James Edwards that's going to be coming on from The Athletic probably within the next day or two, after we kind of get acclimated and things start settling in, to talk about the Pistons and some of the moves that they've made and so forth. So appreciate everybody for checking it out, and I'll be seeing you guys within the next few hours, in a minute, until the next episode. Peace.